Everybody's got opinions. Favorite horror movies, overrated ones, the scariest ever. But this list isn't about opinions. It's based on what people actually watched. These are 11 horror films with more than 1 million watches on Letterboxd, ranked by total watch activity on the platform. Some are modern theatrical hits, others are older films that never really left people's watch lists. And the mix is strange in the best way. You've got an alien horror, studio monsters, 80s creature chaos, prestige horror, and even a few films people still argue about being real horror, which honestly makes the list more interesting. At 11 is Gremlins, which is still a genuinely weird movie to explain if you've never seen it.
Rafe. Mischievous.
It starts like a Christmas gift story. A kid gets a cute creature, there are rules, everyone ignores the rules, and halfway through, the movie just stops behaving. Directed by Joe Dante, this isn't structured like a normal horror film. There isn't one clean escalation. It's a series of set pieces that get progressively more unhinged. The bar scene, the movie theater, the kitchen attack, all of them playing like their own short films. The tone is the whole point. It's meaner than people remember, but also funnier than it should be. At a certain point, the plot just becomes background noise. It's the kind of movie people revisit just to watch specific scenes again. It doesn't age like most 80s horror because it was never trying to play by those rules in the first place. At 10 is M3GAN, and this one knew exactly what it was doing from the start. Directed by Gerard Johnstone, produced by James Wan, and carried by the physical performance of Amy Donald, with voice by Jenna Davis. The film is basically one long experiment in control. Not possession, not malfunction, control. The premise is simple. A child gets a companion AI that's designed to protect her emotionally. The problem is that the AI starts defining protect for itself. The dance went viral everywhere, sure, but the more telling scenes are the quieter ones. M3GAN just standing still, watching, processing, deciding. There's a moment where you realize she's no longer reacting, she's planning. That shift is where it becomes genuinely unsettling. It's not about something going wrong, it's about something working a little too well. Daily horror news and lists at likehorror.com. At 9 is Prometheus, which is less a horror movie and more an argument that never really ended.
These things moving?
What is that?
There's a ship. They're leaving.
Directed by Ridley Scott, it was marketed as a return to the Alien universe and then spends most of its runtime asking questions it refuses to fully answer. Who created us? Why, and whether that even matters. The horror shows up in flashes. The surgery pod scene with Noomi Rapace is the obvious one. Brutal, mechanical, impossible to look away from. But the rest of the film is quieter. People walking into rooms they shouldn't, touching things they absolutely shouldn't. What keeps it alive on Letterboxd isn't agreement, it's friction. You can watch it, you have an opinion, and then you go back to see if you missed something, or if it really is as messy as you remember. Most horror films faded once you know the outcome. This one lingers because it withholds just enough to keep the argument going. At 8 is A Quiet Place, Day 1. And what makes it work is restraint, especially for a prequel. Directed by Michael Sarnowski, the film drops the story into New York on the first day of the invasion, following Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o. You expect chaos, screaming, panic. Instead, the film slowly drains sound out of the city. There's a stretch early on where everything just stops. Traffic freezes, conversations cut off mid-word. People start realizing the safest thing they can do is nothing. That's where it clicks. The original A Quiet Place worked because silence was survival. This one works because you watch your rule being discovered in real time. It's less about the creatures and more about the moment people understand the rules. And once that clicks, the rest of the film doesn't feel the need to over-explain anything. At 7 is Smile 2, and the smart move here is that it doesn't try to repeat the first film.
You are in the middle of a big world tour.
You okay?
I keep seeing this face everywhere.
Director Parker Finn takes the same idea, trauma that spreads through witnessing, and drops it into a completely different environment. Fame. This time, the story follows a global pop star played by Naomi Scott, which changes how the horror behaves. You're no longer dealing with isolation, you're dealing with visibility, cameras, crowds, people always watching. And that's where it starts to get uncomfortable. There's a rehearsal sequence where nothing dramatic technically happens, but the smiles start appearing where they shouldn't. Background dancers, crew members, faces holding just a second too long. The tension isn't, what is that? It's, why is no one else reacting? What makes a sequel work is that it understands the original idea wasn't about the entity, it was about perception breaking down. And putting that inside a public life makes it harder to escape, because even when something is wrong, you still have to perform like it isn't. At 6 is MaXXXine, and this one feels like a completely different genre, wearing horror's clothes.
Made it to the belly of the beast.
Directed by Ty West, it's the final chapter in a trilogy that's already shifted tone twice. X as slasher, Pearl as character study, and now this shift into Hollywood. Mia Goth plays MaXXXine like someone who's already survived her horror story and is now trying to outgrow it. The problem is the world she's entering is just a different kind of danger. There's a moment on a soundstage where everything around her is fake. Buildings, streets, lights, and it weirdly makes her feel more exposed, not less. That's kind of the film in one image. It's less about being chased and more about being watched, judged, measured. The violence is still there, but it's no longer the focus. What sticks is the idea that horror doesn't end, it just changes shape depending on where you go next. Quick pause before we go forward. Tell us which of these have you actually watched and which ones are still on your list. At 5 is The Invisible Man, and what makes it work is how little it shows you.
Are you okay?
Directed by Lee Wannell, the film isn't built around spectacle, it's built around absence. Elizabeth Moss plays Cecilia like someone constantly second-guessing her own reality, and the camera leans into that. Empty frames, doorways, corners where something could be standing. There's a moment where the shot just sits on an empty kitchen for a few seconds longer than it should. Nothing moves, nothing happens, but you're still scanning the frame. That's what it's doing. The film understands that invisibility isn't interesting by itself. What matters is how it changes behavior, how it makes someone hesitate before speaking, before moving, before trusting what they see. It's less about a man you can't see and more about what happens when you're not believed. At 4 is Late Night with the Devil, and the reason it works isn't just the concept. It's commitment to the format.
As we attempt to commune with the devil.
Lily, can you hear me?
Directed by Cameron Cairns and Colin Cairns, the entire film plays out like a recovered 1970s talk show broadcast. David Dastmalchian anchors it as a host who's trying to keep things controlled long after he clearly can't. And the pacing is the key. It doesn't rush into horror, it lingers in awkwardness, bad jokes, forced smile, slightly off interviews. You're watching a show that isn't working before you're watching something that's wrong. Then it shifts and there's no way back. And because the film never breaks its format, you don't get the usual escape. No cinematic cutaways, no relief, you're stuck in the broadcast as it collapses. That's what makes it hit. Not the possession, the fact that it happens live and no one can stop it. At 3 is Godzilla Minus One, and what's different here is that scale doesn't come first. Directed by Takashi Yamazaki, the film starts from a much smaller place. One man trying to live with the fact that he survived when he thinks he shouldn't have. Ryunosuke Kamiki plays him like someone who's constantly holding something back. The monster shows up later, but the tension is already there. When Godzilla finally arrives, especially in the Ginza sequence, it's not staged like a victory of spectacle moment. It feels heavy, slow, almost inevitable. Buildings go down, people run, but nothing about it feels exaggerated. That's where it separates itself. The film isn't asking you to be impressed, it's asking you to sit with the damage. And once you lock into that, the rest of it hits in a completely different way. Act 2 is Smile, and this one works because it keeps its idea simple and refuses to over-explain it.
You have it. Get away from me! Get away!
Directed by Parker Finn, the film follows a psychiatrist played by Sosie Beacon who witnesses something she can't rationalize and then starts seeing it everywhere. The rules are clear, but the film doesn't overcomplicate them. You see it, it stays with you. That's all it needs. What makes it effective isn't the jump scares, it's repetition. The same smile showing up in different places, different people, different contexts. There's a moment at a birthday party where everything is slightly off before anything actually happens. That's where the film lives, in that space where you're waiting for something to break. But by then, you've already adjusted it to the discomfort. That's why the idea lingers. It's not about what the entity is, it's about how quickly it becomes normal to see it. At number 1 is Frankenstein, and what makes it land here isn't hype, it's attention.
I demand a single grace from you.
Directed by Guillermo del Toro, this version leans back into what Frankenstein actually is. Not a monster story, but a relationship. Oscar Isaac plays Victor Frankenstein and Jacob Elordi plays the creature, but the film doesn't treat them as opposites. It treats them as reflections. That's the shift. There's less interest in shock or scale and more in presence, how the creature moves, how it's looked at, how quickly it becomes something people refuse to understand. Del Toro's films have always worked that way. The horror isn't just what you see, it's how people respond to it, and that's why people are responding to it the way they are. Not because it reinvents Frankenstein, but because it takes it seriously again. One more film that has also crossed the million-watch mark, Bring Her Back. Directed by Danny Filippo and Michael Filippo, the duo behind Talk to Me, the film leans further into grief-driven supernatural horror. Like their previous work, it focuses less on traditional scares and more on emotional intensity, letting the horror build through discomfort rather than spectacle. Its rise on Letterboxd reflects how quickly audiences are responding to that approach. It's a reminder that modern horror isn't slowing down, it's evolving. That's the list, now it's your turn. If you want something real next, watch our top 10 horror movies based on true events. Happy horror watching!